Yeah, hello guys. Welcome to another session, which is the third part of the process of us building a backend engineering, a backend API, RESTful API using Golang. So in the last session, we went through setting up our database, and I promised in the last session that what we'll be setting up here now in this new session is setting up our route, having a specific folder or package that our routes will actually reside in, which is basically what we'll be doing in this particular session. So let follow along, and if you have not actually watched the last one, I will appreciate that you go back, review it, and actually see how we actually set up the database and how we actually set up the whole application right from the beginning. So as you can see, let's a quick recap. We have installed Echo Framework, which is what we are using to serve our application. We have installed the go.env by Joho to load our environment variables. So once you load this, all the environment variables becomes accessible through the os.getEnv function from the Golang package itself. Um, so we are rendering our app on a port of 3000, which is in our app ports. Then we've also set up our database, which is called Budget App. So try to watch the previous videos in order to follow along judiciously. So this session, as I promised, will be focusing more on handlers. So to start, the first handler I'm going to create is, I'll just call it app. Um, I'll just call it app handler. And our app handler will also have a package name of handlers, just like our handlers have. And in our so to register an handler in Echo framework, let's see how handlers are registered. Uh, so let me see. Uh, IP address response. Let me look for one. Okay, let me look into the crop. So as you can see, this is basically how an Echo framework handler looks like. It accepts the Echo framework context and it returns an error. So I will just copy this and go to our code editor and paste it in. So what I will be calling this is, I'll just call it, let me call it health check, right? So I will remove all of this. I'll just call it health check. So our handler is expecting the echo context, and I will be attaching it as a receiver. If we look up what receiver is, receiver in Go. So receiver is just a way, it's if you are coming from the object-oriented programming language, it is like, okay, you've created this class, created class main, you've created class person, and you want class person to have a method called print person name. That's basically, we could associate it to something like that. So this pointer receivers allows us to associate our application with a particular struct. So because so the struct we'll be associating with is the handler struct, and you will see why very soon. So I will call the handler. So the reason why I'm doing this is so that I will be able to access the methods on the handler. So what I will just be doing here now is I will just send a response. Let me see, how do we send the response? The reason why I'm going back to the documentation is because I want you to actually know how to go through the Echo framework documentation to look for what you are looking for. So as you can see now here, we are sending JSON. So I will just send JSON. And the JSON that I will be sending will just be, let me just call it let me create a small struct, a struct. Let me say, or I can even send, let me say, okay, a struct. Let me create a struct. And let me say, else check. And let it be a boolean. We send, so let me just call this else check struct. We're sending it right here. So our else check struct, we'll set it to true. In Golang, this is what we call anonymous structs. Anonymous struct in the sense that I don't know why my else, okay, let me just call it else, relate to else check struct. So in Golang, this is what we call anonymous struct. So if we just check anonymous struct, anonymous must struct, we go to the go anonymous struct. If you check gig for gigs, so a structure in Golang is user defined. So anonymous struct, you are allowed to create anonymous struct. Anonymous struct is a structure which does not contain a name. Normally, if we are going to define a structure, we are going to say structure, say type struct. You are giving it a name, but this one we are not giving it a name. So the reason why I'm not doing that is basically I just want to use it to do one or two things. So in order to now make use of this, in order to serve this controller, this handler that we have actually created, what we will need to do is if we go to route, going back to the documentation again, our Echo framework documentation, let's look for routing. So as you can see, the method that you've created and the route. So let me copy this and let me go to the main folder, and right here I'm just going to replace this, or let me even just replace this with, so this method that is created here is what we are replacing. You will see it has a similar signature to our app handler here. It is also accepting echo context. The only difference is I've associated a pointer to a receiver pointer to it. So because I've associated this receiver pointer to it, I'll be able to easily call this method in our main here. So I'll just remove this and say handler, no, as at the point that we've actually declared our handler. So I will just move it to somewhere here and say, let me refactor that. That will be our handler dot the method that we have actually created, right? So that will be handler dot is not accessible. Why handler? The reason why it is not accessible is simply because, so if you want a method to be accessible out of packaging, a package in Golang, you have to make sure the method name is in capital letter. So that was the mistake that I made. So you have to make sure it is in capital letter. So we come back here and we say handler.out check, right? So if we relaunch our application again, and come back to this, okay, something is wrong. Our struct is not being sent. So we have the wonder why that is it. Why that is happening. Uh, so now it should actually return something. Why is it not returning the value here? Okay, let me try something. Type name else check. Check else. So if we initialize it, let's say our else is Boolean, to say else check else should now be true. We say, let's say data, let's call it data. Or let's just call it what we actually call this. And let's refresh again. Refresh. Okay. So so let's check. So okay, I think I am missing something. So when you define a struct, you have to also define how the struct will be displayed or will be converted to JSON. So that is actually available if we check if we check binding binding. So if you check binding, you will see that in order for you to actually display, I'm trying to. So in order for you to actually convert, so when you define a struct, you must also define how it is going to be represented in JSON if you want it to display, which was the mistake that we were making. So if we go back now and define the JSON, I'll call it else. So in order for it to be accessible outside, it must also be a capital letter, and we replace it with this. Then once we come back here, let's refresh our application again, and we come back to our route and refresh. Now you can see it is showing. So that was the mistake that we were making earlier. So basically, that is the purpose our handler will be serving. We'll be able to define all the methods we need here, and we'll be associating it to the handler pointer as a receiver so that we can call it in the main.go file. But let's take it a step forward. All right. It will have a lot of routes in our application, which includes making use of middleware and the likes and the likes. And it doesn't make any sense, or it makes sense, but if you are building an application that will actually contain a lot of routes, it will not be a wise choice to leave all your routes. We don't want this main application to be a very long um line of code that will now be finding difficult to actually understand down the lane. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create another file called routes inside our API folder, routes. Then inside the route, so inside the route folder, we are also going to have another function, which I'm going to call route. I'm just going to call it route. The reason why I can write it in small letter is because simply because I'm going to use the method within the package main itself. So for the route, now we need to understand that route should be accessible to the application struct, because so for the it is directly attached to the application. So which is why for the route, we are going to be attaching it to the application pointer. Pointer. And the route will basically be expecting our initialized echo application, which will be of type echo. That's echo. And inside the route, we can now define all our routes. So if I come here and copy this, I'll cut it, in fact, routes, and paste this here. Now, the problem we have now is we don't have access to our handler inside this place, and we cannot initialize our handler, as you can see, which is our handler here, right? Or another thing we can do is we can pass the handler into this. Let's see how that will work. Handler, let me call it handlers. Oh, sorry, I'm beginning to write this as PHP handlers.handler. So we are expecting a type of handler, so we can now access handler.lcheck, right? So now in our main application, we will now say app.route, and we'll pass in the echo, the server, which another thing in thinking about it, we probably don't even need to pass it the server, since our application has access to the server itself. So we can just say app.server.get, right? Since our application, if you look at our application slot, we already attached this server that we are expecting in the route method. So we can just remove this, right? We can just remove this and say app_server.get. Now in our main file, we will now update our route to accept the handler. We'll pass in the handler into it. So if we refresh our application again and come to this, we can see we are still getting our health check routes accessible. So this way, we've separated our route. So any route that we are going to define will come in here. And we have a function that we house all routes that are associated to our application that we can easily call in our main.go file. So today we have been able to treat how to actually define routes, how to define route handler. We've also been able to move our handlers from the main function into another file called routes. So that way it will be easier for us to easily pass. It will be easier for us to group, to have all our routes in a single place instead of getting it modeled up in our main.go file. So the aim is to make our main.go file as light as possible, not to have too many configurations in it. So this will be the end of today's session, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next session. Thank you.